get started ASAP. Some of us have Pesach things to do, you know. Still have Yishlach Manot to eat. Hi, so my name is David Pardo. I work at the Orthodox Union. I choreograph the Purim Spiel. I work with young professionals. And I'm very happy to be working with the leadership of Frumdevs, who are working on building up this community and also building a conference. And you can talk to some of them if you're interested in helping and participating. Anyone want to raise their hand who? Okay, so if you want to learn more or help out, please talk to those folks. It would be inappropriate to start any kind of event with this many Jews in a room without just a shtickle, a bissel, a Torah. It's Parsha Shmini. For those of you who regularly give drashas, Torahs, Vayikra is a very hard time of year. It's much easier to talk about Purim and Pesach, and you might notice that happening in Shul. So the thing about Vayikra is it's very low on stories and high on halacha and dinim. There's only two stories. There's only two narratives in all of Vayikra. One of them happens this week, and one happens shortly. There's only two stories. One story is the story of the sons of Aaron on the 8th day of Hakamas Mishkan, of building the Mishkan. Exactly what they did. They brought in a foreign fire, something, and Hashem saw fit to kill them for it. That's one story, and the subsequent Aaron mourning. And the other story is the story of the Makoshesh Eitzim, someone who violated Shabbos, according to Chazal, the very second Shabbos violated. Who is the Makoshesh Eitzim? The Makoshesh Eitzim, Chazal say, is the son of an intermarriage. He's the son of a Jewess and a Mitzri. Why these two stories in the middle of Vayikra and no other stories? So I heard once from Rabbi Brander, I think it's an evergreen Dvar Torah, but especially during during Vayikra. Vayikra is about building the Mishkan, and building the Mishkan is about building the center point of our community. It's about really building shuls, building schools, building all the artifacts of community. That's what Vayikra is all about. There's only two stories. One story is the story of setting the bar too low. The sons of Aaron wanted to do whatever they wanted to be creative. They wanted to make things up. They wanted to improvise. They wanted to bring their own creativity, their own rules, their own ideas into the Mishkan. And Hashem said no. The other story is the opposite. The Makoshesh Eitzim was a kid who's byproduct of an intermarriage in a time when there wasn't intermarriage, right? So what do you think his childhood was like? He probably got kicked around. He probably got called names. He probably got all sorts of things. He probably didn't have a lot of friends, is the truth. And one day he said, forget it all. So he's the kid on the periphery. He was the kid on the periphery. He was the kid on the outside. He was the kid who didn't know the other kids, and the man who didn't know the other people. And so that's the story of setting the bar too high. And in building our community, I think it's so important always to think of how do we make sure that the bar isn't too low and that the bar isn't too high, that we maintain the definition of our community and what the goals of our community, the mission, values, and how to make it cohesive on the one hand. On the other hand, how to not exclude and how to look for the person on the outside and look for the person who's lonely and the person who needs some help and the person who needs an introduction and the person who needs an invite to Shabbos. We have to hold these two opposites in mind at all times. We're also very excited to learn a lot more about Agile from Ari Urbach, who has been so generous with his time, and we asked that, what did we decide we asked? He'll let you know what he asked.
Okay. There was a further thank you very much. Hi, thank you very much, and I have to say it is an honor to talk to this group. It's my first time actually talking to such a large group of developers, and it's a distinct honor. So let me start the presentation. The request was specifically regarding questions, and there was a request to ask questions towards the end. However, I do like an interactive session, so if I'm going too fast, too slow, you feel a point needs some clarification, you could Feel free. You don't look like a shy group. Yes?
I think a good rule of thumb is that your questions should end with a question mark.
Okay.
So what do you think going?
So the first question I actually started out with a question for all of you actually is how many of you are familiar with Agile and how many of you used Agile? It's two questions. A lot of people familiar with Agile. How many people used Agile? Good. How many people like Agile? Oh, good. Okay, so it's not a completely hostile crowd. All right. So I have a few titles, which actually doesn't really tell you much. But I started out as a developer. I did that for about 12, 13 years. I then became a Scrum Master when we switched over to what was then called Scrum. When we switched over to what we call Kanban, I became an Agile coach. And then about a year ago, they officially decided to give me the title of Manager, Lead Development Project Manager. And I still do all these jobs. And pretty much on a daily basis, there's not really much of a difference. So each one of them has a little nuance. So I moved the slides that I had at the end of the presentation to the front of the presentation, just to talk about Cerner Corporation. It's a supplier of health information technology solutions, devices and hardware, not that much hardware. And they have 27,000 facilities. Now that would mean any hospital, for instance, that has a clinic, that would be another facility, another location around the world. And they have about 28,000 employees based in Kansas City, Missouri, and Malvern, Pennsylvania, and across the globe. Specifically, the unit that I work with is called Financials, Soaring Financials. It's a product that Cerner sells to hospitals, large hospital systems, including in New York, quite a few facilities. And we have in my group of, let's say, 500 people that work for this part of the company. That's not good. 500 people work in the company. We have about 200 or so developers divided across, 20 or something teams. And they focus on areas such as patient access, claims, and scheduling, and rules engine. And then there's also going to be architectures and clients, and that'll bring me a little bit closer, but it's also going to be the plug. Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. So, go ahead.
So, based on that, you're managing remote teams?
Well, let me just add one more bullet to the slide. And there we go. This flickering is going to make me nervous, but hopefully not everybody else. The daily interaction we have with Teams members working in Kansas City, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that's supposed to be Maryland, but it says MA, Romania, and Calcutta. So that's a pretty large group of people. Do I deal with these people all the time? My team, now I don't manage all these teams. I work on a claims team. There is actually 2 claims teams. We work very close coordination. That's part of the job that I do, is to make sure that we stay in close coordination with each other. My team actually has people, which does not say over here. When I say New Jersey, there's a group of people that work out of Lakewood. We have some people in Queens, and most of the people are in the office in Brooklyn with us, although people in Pennsylvania and Calcutta is over here. Calcutta is in India, for those who are not familiar. So we're working with that people. So our team is a remote team and a local team at the same time. The one thing that I do have, at least as a benefit, is we're all in the same time zone. When we have interdependencies with teams in different time zones, it's not specific to my team. Teams that have dependencies overnight, that's a whole different type of handoff that they need to deal with and do. For those of you who are not familiar with what a Scrum Master is, this was actually supposed to be the last slide, so if someone was going to ask me, what do you do all day? There's a lot of jobs and responsibilities and process that a Scrum Master has to do. If you look up the official definition, it's going to say servant leader. The two are oxymoron slightly. You can't be a servant and a leader at the same time, but the concept is you're in charge, but at the same time you're supposed to try to be helping people and take care of them. If that's not what you're doing, if you're not helping the people, then you are actually what you're called as a project manager, because you're driving the project and you're running after people for updates. If you're actually a Scrum Master, what you're really supposed to be doing is trying to make sure that the project moves forward by getting the people to do their job. If this sounds like a novel concept, we can talk more about it. The rest of it, Agile coach, facilitator, mentor, teacher, you can get all these things over here. Some of them get to the bottom over here as inventor and detective, because ultimately it's your job to make sure that things move smoothly, and sometimes you have to, if you're familiar with developers, and I assume some of you in this room might be developers, you might be familiar with developers as being very self-reliant and really wanting to figure things out on their own. And when they have something that they come across that's not working, what's their nature? What's the tendency? You're going to figure it out. You're going to look at Stack Overflow. You're going to start reading it. Some of you actually go to a manual. But you're going to try to figure it out because that's what you do. And I don't know if it's pride or if it's practical or it's just the nature of us. So one of the things you have to do is actually figure out what's stopping the person and try to get them to move beyond that hurdle and help them progress. You're also a liaison between management and the team. And one of the biggest obstacles to Scrum and Agile is management. And if management doesn't buy into it, even if they say they are, but if they keep coming after you with estimates and changes, or looking for blame or things along those lines, you're really not going to get anything done in an efficient manner. And you could say that you're doing Scrum or Agile, but you're not. You're busy reacting to change that's not coming from a client. You're reacting to change that's coming from management. It's a whole different level of change. Okay, the rest you can go across over there. These are tasks that people do. So I'm going to jump in right now. We are a little bit tighter on time than I thought we were going to be, so I'm going to jump into this. I'm going to try to move a little bit quickly. People do tell me I talk quickly, so if I'm talking too quickly and someone wants me to slow down or wants to follow up on a point, go for it. The Agile Manifesto, for those, anybody ever seen the Agile Manifesto? Good. Okay. The Agile Manifesto was a group of developers who were actually working on Scrum and XP, Extreme Programming. And those are two methods that predate Agile. Doesn't sound like it, but Agile is the manifesto and everything's built on that, but Scrum was already actually existing before that. So they came up with 4 concepts that really simplify the world. We value individuals and interactions over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation. Doesn't mean you don't need documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, meaning your dealings with the customer should be to provide for the client what the client is looking for. And responding to change over following a plan. So, go ahead.
Elaborate on this.
Which one?
On all.
Okay, sure. Process and tools is something that most corporations, if you work in a large corporation, you have a lot of processes that you have to follow. And for good reasons. Some of them are just to make sure that you're going to pass the next audit for whichever industry that you're in. If you have certification, you're going to need to follow that process. Also, large corporations like to make sure that development teams are following a process. So you're going to have a lot of processes, how you develop, when you check in software, where you're checking in software, and how you go about it. So someone mentioned to me before, big room planning is a process. Sprint planning is a process. Actually, Scrum is a lot of process, but they didn't call it process. They call it rituals or ceremonies. So they get away with it a little bit. But Agile says we value individuals' interactions over process and tools are great. Without the standard set of tools, you can do a lot. If everybody's using the same development environment or the same IDE, if everybody's using the same tools, you can do a lot. If everybody's using Eclipse, then you're going to find the right plugins and you're going to get further. Now, if you're not using the same tools and everybody's beating to their own drummer, you're going to find a lot of chaos. However, the more you talk to people and the more you have a conversation, when you get stuck about something or you're trying to overcome a hurdle or you want to clarify what the requirement is or how this doesn't make sense to me as a requirement, that individual interactions over process and tools, that's what it specifically is talking about. We want people to have the conversation. So that was the first item. Working software is the biggest measure. Now, if you look at waterfall, does anybody still practice waterfall here? Okay. Yes, you do? Sort of. Okay. Well, you do? Okay.
Sort of.
The full 6-7 months of 3 months documentation, 3 months testing, and 3 months development? What? Much smaller scale. Okay, fine. Which is fine. So I can knock a little bit about waterfall, so no one's going to feel that bad about it. The concept is that you would actually create your design and your documentation before you actually wrote a line of software. So that was what that is trying to address. Documentation is great, but it's not going to satisfy a client. If the client actually gets the best documentation, it's a book, but they can't use it. I'm going to have to keep doing that. Oops, sorry. If the client can't do, well, actually, it's not a bad slide to get to. If I can get back into here, well, this will be great. Sorry about that. Let's go back a slide, and we will try to get things back in here. Okay, these are the 4 bullets that we were talking about. Development of working software is the actual best measure that you're succeeding. So that's what item number 2 was. This is actually a quick reference to what I was just showing on the other screen. Number 3 is client collaboration. You constantly want to be talking to the client. You're not negotiating with them. Development teams are not negotiating with them. You're not supposed to be the ones telling them this is out of scope. Well, you could sometimes, and you do have to tell clients things are out of scope. But as a development team, when they say they want something, people are familiar with that picture where they show what the client wants and what they got. They're people familiar as a swing if they show how the whole thing was described. I should have put it into here, but essentially, you want to get their input. If you're creating a process or you're creating for them a workflow, and they have no value from this workflow. This is not what they wanted. What they were really looking to do was to be able to modify X, and you gave them something that's going to build Z. You didn't satisfy them. This keeps flickering. I'm not sure why. If it doesn't bother anybody else, I'll try to live with it. Is it my wire? Or is it that wire? Maybe I shouldn't move around so much. I can turn it this way. What? All right. I'll try to talk more. The color is a little bit off, but that's fine. Responding to change is something that Scrum does often. Scrum is what most people assume when they talk about Agile, they think of Scrum. Scrum does not respond to change well. Why? Because you're working in a sprint. A sprint is a time-boxed amount of time, and any purists over here, Scrum purists, working perfectly in Scrum, you're not supposed to change mid-sprint anything. Even if the client doesn't want it anymore, you're going to finish that story in that sprint. We don't change what we've committed to for the sprint. It may not be true today because Scrum has updated over time, but back when I learned Scrum, you always had to finish the stories that you committed to for that sprint. Responding to change means that if this is no longer desirable or this became a high priority, you will be able to change and not say this is going to take 6 months for me to shift gears or even a full month to get to. So those are the 4 items. Did that help the elaboration? A little bit? Okay. So they had a manifesto, but it wasn't really how you develop. It was concepts, it was ideas. So behind that manifesto, they had what they call the 12 Agile principles, and this was the hint of a framework. You can look it up all on agilemanifesto.org, principles.html, and the ideas were, if it's legible, satisfy the customer, welcome change, deliver frequently, work together. Sounds familiar? This is sort of pretty much what we were describing. Trust and support the team. That's to trust and support each other. And the team becomes a very integral part of what you're working on. My first 12 years as a developer, I worked with a great group of people, still the same group of people that I'm working with, many of them. However, we weren't teams. I got my job, they got their job. I worked on my program, he worked on his program, and there was no support, and trust didn't even come into it because we weren't checking in code against each other. We could blow up in the same environment, plot would comment, but we weren't actually interacting with each other in that sense. Face-to-face conversations, can't overstress that. So how do we do the face-to-face conversations if you work with people in Calcutta and you work with people in New Jersey? We use Skype a lot. Skype has become less reliable, and I don't mean Skype, the commercial one, Skype for business. And we've actually started using Microsoft Teams, and there's other applications out there that you want to use as well that will allow you to actually have visualization and FaceTime with people. But that's how you have the best conversations. Working software, I'm going to read the rest of them down. Continuous attention, maintain simplicity, self-organizing teams, reflect and adjust, and what was the last one? Sustainable development. Self-organizing teams is a big part of this, actually, and when teams constantly get into a feedback loop of what's working and what's not working, that's where this becomes the most powerful tool that you can use. All right, so what is Agile replacing? We said the word before, waterfall. And the concept of waterfall is when you got your requirements, and that was the first set of work that you did. Then you worked in the design and the documentation up front. You went into implementation, which is development. Then it was handed off to testing, and then deployment maintenance. It was called waterfall because it looks like sort of like a rapid going over. Now, what's the problem with this? Each one of these worked in a group. This was happening for a month, let's say a month or 2 months. And then, well, 2 months is not really realistic for a large-scale program. So you're talking about sometimes 4 months, 6 months worth of work. If testing found a problem and had to go back, implementation already moved on to the next project. You're out of luck. So now everything's thrown off because they're already on the next big project they're working on. Testing took the whole entire batch at once. The main key of waterfall, the main knock against waterfall was that everything was coming through in large batches. So if anybody's, when you say you're doing it on a small scale, I don't think you're actually doing handing off entire projects and then moving on to the next project. If you are, and it's working, that's great, but this is what you're trying to avoid when people talk about waterfall. And then if the implementation was a problem, you had to go back to design documentation and requirements, or if it was found out in the field, you're all the way back to square one in order to implement any change. So you could be looking at a year or two. Sometimes the clients would have to feel they got something delivered to them. It doesn't suit their needs, and now they have to come back, convince you that it doesn't suit their needs. We're not even talking about a bug. We're talking about something that just you delivered, and this is not what they wanted. And now you're already working on the next project for the next client. You're trying to manage your priorities, and they're not happy. So getting it right is important. Okay. How did we propose? We, this doesn't mean me. We means Scrum came up with a framework that people can address complex adaptive problems. I'm actually reading this from the Scrum manual, so these are not my words. Scrum is a framework within which people can address complex adaptive problems while productively and creatively delivering products of the highest possible value. I like how they stuck creatively in there. Scrum itself is a simple framework for effective team collaboration on complex products. I did take out some things in between. Scrum has roles, events, artifacts, and rules. What are the rules? You actually would look for Scrum rules, you're not going to find them. The entire Scrum guide is considered the rules, and you have to follow them. So, what's the problem? Scrum is lightweight, simple to understand, but it says difficult to master. Difficult to master is not a good way that you want to go into something. So as I spoke to someone here before in the room, he says, we were checking the box. Maybe some of you feel the same way when you're doing Scrum, but you're not actually getting the value from it. And what the Scrum manual actually says, and I'll get to that in a slide that's a little bit further down, Scrum is immutable. If you do not follow Scrum as per the guide, you are not practicing Scrum. So therefore, it does fail in many ways. And the simple way out for them is saying, well, you made this modification to it, so therefore, that's why it's not working for you. But we're not looking to blame it or scapegoat it. It's just not as flexible as you think it would be. If it's based on the Agile principles, it doesn't seem to be very agile. Scrum has roles. So for it sounds like people here are familiar with Scrum. I'll go through it a little bit quickly. This is based on the latest version of Scrum, not the Scrum from 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Scrum is making changes to it. So you have a product owner, you have the Scrum Master, and then you have the development team. So when I started Scrum, we had different roles on the development team, and the different roles were a developer, a tester, it could have been an architect, it could have been a UX design, it could have been somebody who's involved in all these different parts of it. Today, everybody who's not the product owner, who's essentially really not even part of the team, or not the Scrum Master, is the development team. Scrum looks at everybody as one large unit, and they all are, as a team, dedicated to getting this done, no matter what it takes, which is actually a nice thing, but it doesn't work that well all the time. For those who want a little elaboration, product owner is expected to do the best possible job of satisfying all the stakeholders, maintain the product backlog, and ensure that everyone knows the priorities. These are 100% true. This has to exist in any software development, because if the developers are making the priorities for what the client wants, without a product owner and he's promising and selling something that you're not developing, you're not going to have a very happy client base. On the other hand, if he's not doing a good job, if he or she is not doing a good job of expressing to you what the client wants or what the requirements are, you're not going to do a good job of building it either. So it's a very important role that has to be taken care of. Backlog grooming, which doesn't say over there, maintain the product backlog, they changed the word from grooming, is actually making sure that you have, because you're working in Scrum and other Agile, you're working in smaller bits and pieces and stories and iterations, you need to have the next items always prepared to a degree where you can pick them up. So that's what it means by maintaining the product backlog. Scrum Master helps the Scrum team perform at their highest level, also protect the team from both internal and external distractions. Look at the clock, I think we better hurry up a little bit. Development teams are structured and empowered to organize and manage their own work. Things that people don't like about Scrum. Sprints. And people don't like sprint planning. The daily Scrum is also called a stand-up meeting. If you have a stand-up meeting, you're familiar with it. Now, I actually heard over here a few negative comments about stand-up meetings. I actually like stand-up meetings, and I'll explain to you why as we go along. This Scrum says it's 15 minutes or less. They're never 15 minutes or less. So that's a myth, unless it's a Friday and everybody's looking to get out, but they don't take 15 minutes or less. So if you stand or if you lay down or whatever you want to try to do to make it move quicker, if you just accept it's going to take 30 minutes a day, then it'll take 30 minutes. You have to control the sidebar conversations. I think that's really what the key to it is. And make sure that people are focused on giving their update. Sprint review and sprint retrospective are all parts of Scrum. They work well. Each one has a value to add. And like I said, people comfortable with this right now because I want to move a little bit on to other parts of this stuff. And here's a graphic display of what Scrum looks like. Okay, so we have a similar one over there on that chart. It's very simple. Product backlog, you have big items that are further away, much larger in size. So we don't have to know that much level of detail. As we get closer to it, we want to get smaller and smaller and smaller until we get down to bite-sized pieces or small iterative pieces that the team can work on. You go into planning, sprint planning, you pick your backlog for that sprint, you go into that circle, which is called a sprint. You have a team. This is where the team takes over. Well, the team's actually involved. So here, they have a daily scrum meeting, which is also their iterative. Over there, it shows a nicer arrow. You have your sprint review. You go back, you do your retrospective, your planning, and you have something called an increment. Increment means, well, it used to be called a piece of working software. It's something that can be put into your production queue or into your development. It's not going to break anything. You can build on it, and it can be delivered. If it was a piece of working software, it could be delivered. Yes, it's not going to happen on a feature that you're starting from scratch and you're going to build something, a thin slice, as Scrum likes to look at things. So you built a screen and it has a button that says save, or it has a button that says open, and it works. That's great because you can test it. And it's an increment, you can check it in, but you're not going to deliver that to anybody. So you actually have to hide that behind a switch or something, or make sure it doesn't go out. But what you want to do is get that up out of your development area into an integrated area where other developers are going to work. We call it soak time by us. I mean, that's just a term that we use in our team. We want it to be exposed. We want people to be hitting against it and other code to be hitting against it and everybody to be including it when they're doing, getting their code in. So I gave away a little bit before what's wrong with Scrum. It's rigid. Not everything fits into a sprint, and you don't want to make every story fit into a sprint. Is going to be 1 to 3 weeks. They recommend we used to do 4-week sprints, and even that sometimes is difficult to get things into 4 weeks if testing is included in that amount of time. Because you basically 4 weeks means 20 days in a work environment. 20 days, and you're including testing, and you're including gathering your requirements to get started. You're really leaving the developer with essentially 10 days or 14, 15 days, 2 to 3 weeks time to get their job done. Any problem in testing, and that's all blown away. And what happens in Scrum is that becomes carry over to the next sprint. So that's one of the problems with things not fitting. Can't change plans mid-sprint, so if you ask people who are practicing Scrum today, I believe you can already start changing plans, but officially not. So if this was supposed to be a journey to try to convince you to switch to Agile and Scrum, I'm doing a good job, but I think of convincing you not to, I think, at this time. But here's the kicker. Scrum is free and offered in this guide. Scrum roles, events, artifacts, and rules are immutable. And although implementing only parts of Scrum is possible, the result is not Scrum. Scrum exists only in its entirety and functions well as a container for other techniques, methodologies, and practices. I'm going to work quickly now through this. Scrum did change a lot of things. Green things were things that I highlighted as, this is a 2010, this is a big update to the Scrum guide. So Scrum tells you it's immutable, but yet they're going on a yearly basis making updates to their guide. So they know what's good for changing the Scrum, but you who are actually developing it with your team and you have your local configuration, your local environment, you don't know what to do. You need them to tell you how to change, because your changes are just not going to cut it. Regardless of the work performed by individual team members, they're known as developers, so if you're a tester and you're working in Scrum, you just you're a developer now. They removed many tips and optional practices and techniques. It does not mandate a burn down chart, which used to be mandated, so if you're practicing Scrum, you have to see this chart every day showing you how much work was remaining and how much work was still left to be done. And they've thankfully removed the reference to chickens and pigs. So for those of you who are curious, which as developers you're supposed to be curious, what is a chicken and a pig? So if I read the joke out loud, it's probably going to ruin it, but I'm not sure if everybody can see it from the back. Can you? Okay, I'll wait for a chuckle. All right, so we should open a restaurant. What would we call it? Ham and eggs. No thanks. I'd be committed and you'd only be invested. Involved. So the concept is that you want everybody to be committed to a project, and people who are not committed to a project don't belong in that same level as the team. The team is committed, and people, let's say, different levels of management have to stay on the periphery. We're actually, in Scrum manuals would actually say that the pigs stand in the middle and the chickens have to stay on the end, on the sides. Okay, just telling you what it was. So this was just a little bit of thing.
How did they get that message across now without the reference?
There you go. Thank you. Perfect segue. So some 6 years after that, they figured that they're missing that message. So how did they get it across? They came up with values. Scrum didn't have values originally, and you have to have courage. Means that you have to challenge when things are not working right. Everybody has to be focused on the same set of work. You can't have people going off and doing their own work at the same time. And you have to have a commitment. See, that's the same word we talked about. People personally commit to achieving the goals of the Scrum team. Respect, we talked about, that's one of the Agile principles. And openness, everybody has to communicate. Openness is that nothing is wrong here. This is all perfect. How do you implement it? is all the question of how you do it. You could do this within Scrum, especially if you're doing it in someone who knows the rules and is getting it across and it's working well for your team. But the one thing I would tell is, yeah, it's immutable, but make it work for you, because if not, you're not going to have any value from it. So now I'll talk about how we made it work for us. So we started working with Kanban because we kept bending the rules on Scrum, and the purists kept telling us that we're bending the rules, and we got tired of hearing it. So we decided to look for how to do things right, and how do we make this work? Otherwise, what's the value of going through this? Software development's been around for 20, 30 years before Scrum came along, and people made pretty good programs. Mainframes, we still have people who tell us that they're wonderful. We actually have a product that we still sell. It's still being run by many hospitals here in New York. It's our legacy product. And now today things are much more complex, but we were running projects. So Kanban is it a replacement for Scrum? I don't know if you want to describe that. We kept a lot of things from Scrum that made sense for us. But we also took a look at what this provides us. And the main items that we have to talk about are visualization, Kanban board. They're a board roughly this size, a little bit smaller. And we're using a program called version 1 that we're using, but there's Jira and there's other programs out there, and there's people who can do it in spreadsheets, and people can actually do it with sticky notes on the wall. It all works. But everybody sees the entire unit of work. Anybody wants to know how big this project feature is, you look at the board, see what the backlog is for this feature, see what's on deck, we're ready to move into play. What's specifying is where we're doing analysis level, developing is where we're moving into testing, ready to ship, or whichever columns. You can call the columns whatever you want. I just told you the names that we're using in our office. And the board, we'll talk a little more about the board in a moment. One of the concepts over here, and if you're going to go to a class on Kanban, you'll spend a few hours on this concept. It's called limiting the work in progress. It's also called WIP limits, work in progress. And the concept of limiting the work in progress is actually based on something called Little's Law, which is looking to increase throughput. If you look up Little's Law, for those of you who are more inclined to understand the mathematics behind it, the rules behind it, that's fine. But basically like this. We're going to set up a limit to how we have. My team has 10 developers. I say that a developer can work on one story at a time. Sometimes they can do a second story if they're stuck on something, but not every developer can handle 2 stories at one time. So I'm not setting my limit at 20 stories to be developed at one time. I'd say my limit is somewhere closer to 12 or 13 stories. Now I have a large team. 10 developers is a large team. We are 23 people, my team. So it's we're focusing on usually on 2 or 3 features at a time, and we're working with 4 testers, 2 architects, 2 analysts. So we have a large group of people working together. So there's a lot of balls in the air at the same time, so you have to sort of be able to segregate each one of those features separately. So we do, though, limit the work in progress. So how much can an architect take? How much can a tester take? What's their workload? We set these limits. During our daily stand-up, our Scrum meeting, we actually make sure that we're not violating any of those WIP limits. And that's what keeps us from getting bottlenecks. One of the problems that happens is that if, let's say your developers all get their stories across at one shot, and now the testers are behind, and the developers go and they clear another batch of stories in which the testers still haven't cleared through testing. Now you have a backlog in testing. Nothing's getting through. The problem with this is that everything starts getting out of sync. And by limiting the amount of work in progress, we start finishing stories, and then we start the next story. Think of it as doing construction in a house. You don't really want to be doing the sheetrock and the electricity and the framing all at the same exact time, because at some point you're going to end up with the sheetrock in place and you didn't get the wiring in yet, or something along those lines. Okay, it's not the best example.
Aren't you developers just sitting around waiting?
Oh, great question. Thank you. We're going to come back to that. Okay. There's always work to be done, and we'll talk about that. So managing flow is pretty much really the same as limiting. Well, it's similar to work in progress. Explicit policies is how does work move across my board? I just told you a bunch of columns that are specifying, developing, testing. What's the criteria to move something? So we talk about process. Well, internally, a team has to have a process. If you're working with, now when you're developing for yourself, you're taking a job tonight and you're going to program something for somebody, you say it's done, it's done. I take your word for it. You want to test it, you tested it, great. You didn't test it, you're relying on the code. You know it works. But if you're working with a group of people, and if you're delivering on a scale for a large organization, you need to have something that says that you're actually what you're delivering works, And as a team, you have to be able to agree to what those processes are. Now, I don't say that the whole organization has to agree to this, but at least within your team, you have to have your policies, and you have to be able to call people out on those policies. And call people out, we're not talking about confrontation. It's a very simple question. Did you write a functional description of what this is supposed to do yet? Did you check it in? You're saying that you did it. It's done. Oh, well, AccuRev is down, or whatever you're using for your software to thing it. You didn't check it in yet, so I'm not moving it into testing yet because you're not done with it. We have our policies, we have to follow our policies to make sure that we don't get ahead of ourselves or that we don't become sloppy. Feedback loops is something that you're going to hear in all Agile worlds. The daily stand-up is one of the feedback loops. Testing code is a feedback loop. Having a retrospective as a team, talking about what's working well and what's not working well, is another feedback loop. And getting client validation is another feedback loop, and this goes on at higher levels. Continuous improvement is part of Kanban. Continuous improvement means don't be happy with the way things work. You have an idea to make things better, go for it. And keep discussing it, keep finding ways to make things better. The benefits of Kanban is planning flexibility, because now what happened is we removed the sprint. We no longer have a sprint. We have stories, you start a story, you finish a story. They do not have to finish in a set amount of time. They have to finish. Now, as a team, you're going to start creating stories very similar in size. Won't happen in one day. If you're going to be doing this for a few years and working with the same people, you're going to start planning things. You're going to know what a chunk of work looks like that can be tested, that we can develop, and that we're going to be able to check in without breaking something else. So that's how you start getting. But your planning flexibility is the first thing that you have, is you have the ability to make changes. We thought we were going to do it in this order. We thought we were going to do this next. Or a requirement changed. We have the ability to make that change right now. Cycle times allow for better predictability and forecasts. We have historical data. I'm working with a group of people now for 9 years. I mean, the team has grown over the years. But my team, I know that if I have something that's going to take 6 to 8 stories on this team, that is roughly a few months, actually. Now, that sounds large. Those are large stories. Yes, we create large stories on this team. If I had another team, they would have somewhere closer to 20 stories in the same amount of time. It doesn't mean that they're doing more work or less work. It just means how long their stories take to get across the board, to get from beginning to done. That's the cycle time. And then I could give you predictability based on that of how long. If I could estimate this out, the work, into what the steps are, I could figure out how long this is going to take us to do. Not in days and weeks. I'm not going to give you an answer in days and weeks. If you're going to come to me as a manager and ask me for an estimate, I'm not going to give you days and weeks. I'm going to give you a list of what's involved. And then I'll show you historically how long the projects have taken us. Now, teams that actually stay together for a long time and work in the same area, let's say I mentioned claims before, are always going to be in the same domain. So their information is going to be very similar. The type of projects they're going to do are going to be very similar in size and work. Obviously, there's going to be a new feature, but they know what they're doing. The database is going to be the same. They have to add a new table or change something, it's going to be the same. They're not starting from scratch. They're going to be using, they have to write a new service, but they're not adding brand new dependencies that they didn't have prior to this. However, my team specializes in doing whatever needs to be done. So I showed you a list of 20 teams before. Over the last 5 years, we worked in architecture, we worked in patient access, we worked in utilities for clients, and now we're in claims. We started in claims, we moved back. We're, I got the term that someone used, we're free agents, basically. The company fights over our group working on projects that need attention. So we don't have a good historical data because we're always changing our area of focus. But you know what? After enough years of doing that, our historical data is actually accurate now because we're really, we know that we always have a level of unpredictability because we're always going into new areas. So our planning always takes into account that we have to learn a new area, a new part of the system. Let's move into, and continuous delivery is a big part of Scrum, that you're always getting things out there. Well, that's called increments before continuous delivery, but continuous delivery actually means something else. Continuous delivery means that if you have a working product, and if you're cloud-based, you constantly push that to the clients. The clients don't need to necessarily know that you push something. So if you went into Chrome, and Chrome is now on a new version, or Telegram, or whatever app you're using, and they overnight changed it, it should be seamless. You should have no impact to you. You may have a new feature that you didn't have before, but it shouldn't break. So that's the concept of continuous delivery. Let's move a little bit further. This is a Kanban board. This is a Jira board. So Jira is from Atlassian. They host out the concept. And you see the comments up here: done, code review, in progress, and to do. Why did I start from the right side? Kanban boards always work the work starts on the left side, but you review them from right to left. Meaning that you always have, when you're doing the review of the work, you're always trying to see where the work is up to, and you pull cards across the board, you don't push cards. Meaning that people have to be able to pick up the card. I will get back to your question about developers sitting idle, but we'll talk about that in a minute. You always pull cards when a card is ready, it satisfies the criteria to be moved from that column. There's a person available to take that work, they will pull that work into their queue, into that column, and they will address that. So we actually, do you see over here?
How does the developer signify that use?
That is done?
Ready for code review.
Okay. So on my team, we actually, one of the ways will be that you're going to have it on the stand-up will come out. They'll say that the card is going to move. We also ask the developers to send out an email. So that's a redundancy that we built into that. And the third way is that the tester at that point, what we actually changed in our team recently as of 2 years ago, that we have the developer schedule a handle, the tester schedule a handle. When the developer says, I'm done with this card, we actually have a queue. I'll show you in a second. We have it on our board, a queue, a column that says developing. And when the card gets into there, the tester who's available will schedule a handoff meeting to pull that card into.
So you have development and development done.
Yes.
And then the developers could put it into development done.
Right. But just for the sake of the question, that counts against your whip limit. In my world, in our world, developing and developing done count against your whip limit. Your work in progress. So you can't start another. You could start another story if you didn't reach the whip limit yet. But if we're going to violate that limit, we don't want to start that story.
So there's a whip limit on every single line?
No,
On
it's
the
up to
whole
you.
thing?
This one actually, this one actually has on each one. It's completely up to you to decide how you want to put those whip limits into work. What makes sense for you? Some people say, I don't want to see a backlog more than 5 items. And others says, I want everything in my backlog. I want all 26 stories out there.
And what's the main thing of being pull instead of push?
That to keep the flow moving across the board. We don't want to create bottlenecks. We're always trying to find bottlenecks. So the question that you asked before, and I'm going to try to address it now, is what happens if someone gets idle? So in Scrum, I mean, it's called swarming. Meaning that in Scrum, and it's called the development team now, you're not called a developer anymore, you're not a tester. Meaning that wherever work is, every single one of you could be a tester, a developer, or an analyst, and you can pick up that work right now. That's the Scrum's view. We have a pretty similar view to it, except that is we recognize that a developer is not a tester, and a tester is not a developer. So a developer can effectively test something. You're much less likely to get a good result from a tester if he's trying to fit it into programming. So it doesn't work in every single place, right? So every theory is like this. Anybody can test. They may not do it as good a job. They may not be as thorough. But if you have good steps written out, people should be able to follow. So that what happened at that time is we would actually tell a tester, where can you help out today? A developer, where can you help out today? If testing is behind, let's figure that out. If specifying is behind, let's go work on that side. In other words, we have a story that can be looked at now to see what the requirements are. And we will ship people. Now, I also am a firm believer is that there's education you need to take, and you spend a day sometimes just for yourself, a little bit of downtime to catch up on whatever you need to work on. So I'm perfectly fine with a developer having 2 days down over a 2-month period, over a month period. I don't want someone down for a week, but I'm perfectly fine that I'm going to clear the board and keep things moving smoothly as opposed to having things all sudden piling up and not moving through. And they can also work with another developer.
Which of these implements the whole thing?
Which one of these? Okay, so in this particular board, the to-do has a whip limit of 1, which is, this is a little bit silly as an example. The in progress has 4, and the code review has 3, and it says max 2. This is the only one that has a whip limit. I'm sorry, this is just giving you a count of how many cards are in the column. This is a max of 2 things. They don't want being code review more than 2 items at a time. They have 3 in there. They violated a whip limit. Violating a whip limit doesn't mean that you have to stop production. It means you should have a conversation. If you never reach a whip limit, in other words, if I have 10 developers and I make a whip limit of 20 and I'm never reaching it, then that's not a very effective limit because it actually doesn't mean anything. The limit should be somewhere near what you're capable of doing. And you can make a decision at a time saying, I'm starting another story regardless. Why? Because Artifactory is down, Jenkins is not working, whatever it is that you're using in your world. And this is beyond our control, and we know it's going to be fixed within X amount of time. I'm willing to take the risk of starting another story. It's not going to stop the tester. It's not going to put us too far behind. And something to say is, look, we're constantly hitting this limit. We're capable of developing at this rate. We're not hitting backlogs in testing. We can adjust it. So it's a conversation. Some people might tell you the whole point of whip limits is to have the conversation early before you start getting bottlenecked. You look like you have a question. Something's bothering you. Let's go to another slide.
Well,
Yeah, this has more samples of boards. This is version 1. This is the tool that we use, and these are sample boards. A little bit hard to work, but you see, this one has whip limits in progress for development, ready to test, and testing. This board was set up to have one whip limit for all 3 columns. Now, that's not really the way I would work, but this is just a sample of how you can do it. Actually, then you have another board over here. But the main point of it here is the visualization. Why I'm showing this is that you want to be able to see what's in testing. My stand-up goes like this. I start. What's in testing? And we go talk to the tester, give me an update on it. Quick update. Working, not working, yes, no, running into any problems, any issues, find anything. Then we go, okay, ready to test means, okay, can someone schedule a handoff for this? Is somebody ready to pick this up? Do we have the ability to do that? If we don't have the ability to pick this up, then we have to have a conversation.
so ready to test is the only
But
push.
my board doesn't have these particular columns, but that's how that would be working right now. That could also be called dev done.
That would be a push and not a pull.
Well, we don't want it. So the point is, the reason why we have this column here is that the developer cannot put it into testing.
So testing means someone's actually testing. It's not that it's ready for testing.
It means
It's
someone's physically testing this right now.
So every step has a queue data for that?
No, not necessarily. It depends on, you could choose how to set it up the way you want. You could set up each step with a queue. Some people argue that's not very effective, because you could actually build it in, but there's a way to do it. My particular board has now specifying, instead of analysis, it says specifying done, development done, testing done. So I don't have a queue before it. Well, the queue before it is actually the column before it. I have a holding queue afterwards before it moves to the next place.
All those holding queues are push, right?
The holding queues are not, I always put it, I move it into the holding queue. But it doesn't,
But it doesn't go to
the
the
next
stage.
user, the next person who's gonna touch this has to pick it up.
Okay,
That's how it's, but that's the way we implemented it. If you find something that works better for you, you can do that. Okay. Time-wise, I think I'm over already, so I really want to move a little bit quicker. I didn't really get too much over. This is version 1's way of allowing you to set up a board. You can have your cycle time is what I said before, how long something takes. When does cycle time start? So in our world, we start when you bring it on into specifying for analysis, and when you get through testing, you're done. This is really for shipping in my world. This is how the product gets out, and that's external to this development team. It really, once you've checked in, this is going to happen at a release level. So this is not Nagea, use a Hebrew word. That's right. This is not something that you have to worry about. This shows that developing active is, I have, okay, it's 8 is the limit of this board. Accept test active is 4. What is threshold days? I told you, so threshold days means that I know story going through my board should take somewhere about 30 days. I'm telling you where I expect those days to hit. Card should, I've done already now, I know what its feature is. This is a specific card. I don't really need more than 4 or 5 days for any given card to go through the board. So I have over there a threshold, meaning after 3 days the card turns yellow. After 5 days it turns red. Something happened here. This card's not moving. Time for conversation. Developing, 20 days. That's 4 weeks if you do 5-day weeks. I'm not looking at sprints anymore. I'm looking at what I think the card should take. Cards could take 60 days. I don't want cards to take 60 days in development, but I always want to know when I should start asking questions about this. Like I said before, developers like to figure things out, and they like to take their time. If something's not working, there's a lot of pride involved in figuring that out on your own. A lot of satisfaction and a lot of frustration. My job is to make sure that it moves through. So one of the benefits that the stand-up actually gives you is to have the conversation about who got stuck on this and who figured this out, or if it's a problem that everybody's working on. All right, so all this is great, and then we hit the world of reality like hitting a brick wall. And there's the plan. Let's see if the graphic comes up, right? You're going to do it from here to here. It's going to work great. Reality is you follow a path that goes very different than that. And what are the obstacles that you hit? We have clients. They're a big obstacle to getting software done. They have constant demands and they want to change things on you. Management always wants to know when you can get things done with less people and changing processes on you, and then making you be busy with an audit or changing your machine and reorgs at the same time, and everything's changing at the same time, deadlines. There's actually something called bugs and defects and rework, which also wreaks havoc with good plan. Never happens to anybody here, I'm sure. But when you have testers, they actually like to find bugs, so they find that they have value when they find defects. So, you know, I was a developer and I became a Scrum Master, so I actually have to represent more than just development. And I think most people here just represent development, probably. But I have to actually now treat testers as people, and and have respect for them, and analysts and everything as well. So it took time for me to make that switch in my mind. There is a value in testing. Technical debt. Anybody not familiar with that terminology? You've never heard of it? Okay. Look it up. Okay. We always have technical debt. We always do things quick and dirty sometimes because we just need to get through because we have a deadline looming, and we're always going to come back and fix that. And usually when we fix it is because it's haunting us right now and we need to fix it.
Kanban has deadlines?
Kanban doesn't have deadlines. Clients have deadlines.
How do you balance that?
Right. So you figure out in Kanban the size of the story based on the size of the feature based on the amount of stories that you have on it and the amount of unknown. You'd also have your historical data. It's a great question. You also have your historical data, and you're going to figure out, okay, projects this size should take me approximately 4 months. It's a large project. I'm going to double this for my client. I'm going to say 8 months. I don't want to miss that date. Okay, let's get 6 months if I have a certain level of knowledge that I can give. I have a very high level of certainty based on my historical data that I can reach that target date. I don't want to make it 4 months because I'm cutting it too thin. I don't want to come back to the client and tell them I'm moving that date. So I won't commit to something until I have the information that I need to commit to it. It's a lot of pressure on the project manager.
So Kanban relies heavily on
Historical data and cycle time.
mature teams.
Mature teams are the most effective way of getting that information.
And also similar work, right?
Similar work, well, or at least you'll see.
If you're
all that
doing for an
leverage.
agency, like making apps, it wouldn't.
But even on an app, there is a scrub. I mean, certain things are always going to be the same, right? Certain things, and creating a database or doing whatever else you have to do is going to be the same. There's always the part where you need the creativity to figure out something that you've never done before, or using a new technology that you've never done before. Also depending on one person versus a team, and what kind of expertise you have on that for that time. This list goes on, and you could add your own list to it. Competing resources and priorities, ineffective communications, dependency and misalignments means different teams who are all touching the same code base. Or if you have in other words, if you're the reporting team, let's say if your organization is set up that way, and I need a report in order to finish this, and my project's the highest project in the project in the entire company. Everybody knows that, but the reporting team somehow missed that message, and I can't ship now because they didn't know that they had to make that report for me as a high priority. One of the things that we try to do, in my team particularly, is we try to have 0 external dependencies. We try to take all work internally, which is actually frowned upon by management because they like the idea of each team working on their own thing. But we really hate getting stuff behind other teams or other teams delivering us something that doesn't work and having to go through rework. I'm not saying that's feasible for everybody, but that's something we try to minimize. We try to get all expertise in-house if we can. And we'll build that into the estimate. No, we can't
say
always.
that developers like to be independent.
Oh,
I finished that with a question mark.
What's that?
I finished that with a question mark.
Yes.
Didn't you say that developers like to be independent?
Yes.
That's teams too.
Teams too. Yes, 100%. Well, not everybody, but we'll come back to that.
How do you know your estimate of time before you've broken it down? Like, isn't that the next stage in your?
Well, so I don't know my estimate in time before I've broken it down, and I won't commit. I'll give you a rough estimate, and I will give you all the caveats telling you that this is a rough estimate,
Yeah.
and I am not committing to
But
this.
they don't hear that.
Yeah,
Right, and they don't hear
have
that.
to.
So what's the second item on this list over here? Management.
Yeah, right. They don't
So in order for Kanban to work, in order for Scrum or Agile to work, you need management buy-in. And management buy-in is 100% management buy-in. There's also something concept of someone champion. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so as a big corporation like yours, how do you handle those kind of rough estimates when everyone around you needs to make business decisions and staffing and priorities?
Right. So they actually, the way they're trying to solve now is something called big room planning, which I hate. Because Safe uses it, yes, they all do, right. But because you're putting together teams that don't have that much in common with each other, and we're really not looking to swap resources in and out of teams. We argue always that bring the work to the team, not the team to the work. You have a team, they have experience, they'll figure out how to do this. if you give them the requirement. If you're going to start bringing, oh, I need 2 developers, they're all just picking people out from different parts of the system, by the time they actually learn to work cohesively, you've already burned through your estimate. The biggest part of making this work is management has to buy into the fact that I'm not giving you estimates anymore. And you have to be able to say that. So what we did is a compromise, and this is not part of my presentation, is we use forecasting. And we use a method called Monte Carlo forecasting, which is basically saying, if I take this amount of stories with this amount of historical data, just imagine this for a minute, I will run it through 1,000 iterations of estimate, meaning that we're going to add in 5% of scope creep, we're going to add in 5% of people being down, of ramp up time, ramp down time, whatever you want to put in there, all that goes in there. I will be able to run all this information through this forecast based on my historical data, based on the amount of stories I'm giving it, based on 2 or 3 projects running at the same time, and the amount of developers I have and how much a developer can handle, all that information that we talked about till this point, and it will give me a date. And we look for something greater than 85%, 85th percentile, we'll be able to commit to that date. Once we get to the 85th percentile, that date, after 1,000 iterations, we're comfortable.
So the
Why-
probability at a CPM? Isn't that
So-
sort of the
Yes,
probability
except
at-
that this is called Monte Carlo forecasting because it's used by odds makers in Las Vegas. Monte Carlo,
Why,
one at a time.
For that,
Yes. Okay.
Commercial?
Is that-
There's a commercial tool. Actionable analytics is one. Version 1 actually has built into it now some of those type of predictability, and we're using something called Kanban Sim, which is a tool that the guy made himself, but he keeps working with us. We're a large company. He keeps making changes to it. I forgot his name. But it's called Kanban Sim. I actually have it here. I can try to get to it. So we're way over time, so we'll see if we can get to it. You had a question?
I was going to ask, why use Monte Carlo with some planning poker or story points?
Story points and planning poker are specific to a feature, right? And story points are, by the way, relative. That's another thing. They don't mean anything to me.
Universe.
Right. And the same thing with planning poker is guess. Now, if I have an architect who's been doing this for a long time, he really knows his stuff. And I do. And I have some person who came into the room who's just came out of the development academy. They're great. They're ready to go. And he throws down a 20, and everybody else throws down 4 because I have no idea what they're doing in planning poker. So what do we do with planning poker? We don't take the 20. We go, okay, well, let's account for his 20 and make it a 6. Okay? That's how planning poker works. So you've committed yourself now to something that is based on gut feeling at best, if you think about it in that sense. When you're taking it, however, the main thing about Monte Carlo is it's based on your historical data. If you're a new team, you have a problem. You have to eventually build up to some historical data, so you're going to have to put in assumptions in the beginning. But once I can tell you, I know that this group of people working together for this many years, stories take anywhere from 1 day, which is very infrequent, 5 days, 10 days, 12 days, 16 days, 18 days. Now, when Monte Carlo is going through, it's taking 100 days, or 100 stories, data points. And it has all those finish times. And anytime it's going to run through any story, it's going to randomly pick one number out of those 100, and it's going to keep applying it. So I'm getting a much, and then it's going to keep doing this 1,000 times, times the amount of stories that you're putting through it. The number that you come out with is something that's very reliable on how long it's going to take, because it's building a lot of, more than just, I didn't like much today, like, oh, a number, pick it up, and then you're saying. Story points are just a manifestation of the planning program. That's just another version of it. You could just say, oh, this is 2 points, this is 4 points.
How accurate has it been?
It's been accurate. The problem is that you can game the system. You can game the system any time. Because if my job is to, if I know that you want me to tell you that I'm going to get it done by January, then I can make those, I can make enough tweaks to the XML that's going in, that's feeding the data, that will actually change it. So the point is, as a management, if you're in a management role, don't try to force a date. If I can preach that. Now, if a CEO is sitting here, he doesn't want to hear me say that because he's running a corporation. Right? And he wants to know that if I committed to a client, now the point is, again, don't overcommit yourself. Don't let clients drive your agenda.
You constantly check cross-reference.
Yes, we constantly do. As a matter of fact, we have a month, what's called an S3 or an S4 in Scrum. We have monthly report outs where I have to get up there and tell management, this is my forecast date, and this is where I am in the project right now. Now, Will I reach that forecast date? That becomes some question, because if you start looking at graphs and trends, I may not reach it. So there's where my experience as a Scrum Master comes in, saying, I know that projects ramps up slow. I know that that there's time towards the end where things are going to move quickly. I know we're in that phase right now where things take a little bit longer, or we hit one of those unexpected, and we will get there. So it becomes my thing. But what management actually prefers, that I say we're yellow. We're not green, we're yellow. We have an area of concern, but here's my plan to bring that in. And what's my plan to bring that in? I'm going to look for items that can be scoped. I'm going to look to see, meaning that in other words, this was a nice to have, or this technology is not working for us right now. We have to make a switch.
Yeah, I just want to add a point, because I actually do Kanban as well.
Okay.
And I do like that. So the best thing that I've heard about Kanban, and I fully agree with it, is that Kanban is a process improvement framework, and Scrum is more project management framework. So I agree that once you go to a big company that has a lot of projects going on, to get Kanban across everyone is extremely difficult, and you do have to, but there is no conflict with Scrum and Kanban. You can do Kanban within Scrum if you want to. And actually Kanban can be done on top of any process at all.
True. I'm not disagreeing with you. That's why I said before, if you want to call Scrum a Kanban a process.
Right.
So we officially call it as a process, but we're actually doing a hybrid. And that's fine. But many people don't know the difference. And part of being successful, that question for me to say, part of being successful is actually adapting to change, being open and communicating about it, see what works for you as well. What did you?
Really, when you have like an intrinsic contradiction, like management or the client insists that it has to be by a certain date or whatever, then you need them for the revenue or something, and you know as the manager that
I make enemies. I don't make friends. Honestly, no, seriously. My job is to actually to be run interference between management and the team. Now, you're asking me who wins? Management usually wins, but I wear them down to some degree. And I'm not bragging about this. It's part of what I do is I shield the team from these type of requests. It's part of my job. Now, there are others, people who wear the title Scrum Master and don't. But part of being successful is actually having an agile coach. I don't cut corners. We're never going to cut corners on quality. Some teams will cut corners on quality. I will cut corners on when a UX analyst comes back and tells me, oh, we realize now that, you know, this, you have this tree that you have, I want to add a new folder type to this tree. No, sorry. It wasn't part of the original design. We're not doing that. Or it was great when we thought about it to be able to have, you know, this new type of whatever you want to put in, or you want to add a search bar over here. I really wish I could do it. It's not going in. It'll be phase 2, but it's not part of this project. So there is scope at the same time. But another part of it is managing the team through this whole process. So when I have that developer who's trying to figure out how to do something and just keeps hacking at it, with all good intentions and reading the manuals, doing everything, but not asking for help. I don't want to be the one every place of telling everybody that they have to stay a little bit later, which does happen occasionally. But we try very hard never to get to that. The production this year looks like we're not going to have to hit that problem at all, which is good. So what we work on is I have to be the bad guy coming in and saying, what's stopping you? I'm giving you another hour to work on this. After that, you have to reach out to the team. Okay? You can't keep going on this. I see a question.
How do you define your stories?
So the Scrum version of stories and the way that other teams, and the way that officially is supposed to do it is get everybody together, and we're going to throw out stories. People are going to talk. And I actually have a slide on what stories are supposed to look like.
Who's everybody?
Everybody means all the developers, all the testers, all the analysts, and anybody who wants to come to the meeting.
Customers, management?
No, customers would not come to our meeting generally, but you would review with customers later what you want to build before you start building it. You have a client validation. The management should not be there, but there will be sometimes a level of management, like a product owner, that will sit in on it. Better for you if they're not there. But you do want to make sure that you have the requirement correct. So there's a certain balance to run that by them, to show it to them. But the way we do it on our team actually is we will have the people, we will have what we call a reception or a kickoff meeting where everybody hears about what the project is because everybody has input into it. The team that we're going to put together, and we don't look in Kanban and Scrum, we actually would have anybody can work on any story at any time. Great. We put together sub-teams within our team. We choose which developers are working on it, which architect, which analysts. We put together, and which testers. We do put together teams. We cheat a little bit in that sense. And we will ask the analyst or the architect to come up with a list of stories. We'll then review that set of stories with the team. That has maybe to do with our maturity and also protects our developers from getting pulled into endless meetings. So it's sort of a balance. I do have another, believe it or not, a lot of slides. I think we're over time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go quickly through these. Everything revolves around the team. That's how we work. That's how we're successful. Trust is what they say before trust, and in my team specifically, we each have each other. We will care about each other, we take care of each other, and we're very open with each other all the time. So if someone's missing a day, for instance, we give a reason why we're missing. You're allowed to take your vacation, but if you're going to disappear and something personal will happen in your life, share it with somebody. Keep that level of trust. Don't look like you just disappeared. If you just disappeared because you want to take a day off because it's sunny and it's in February, fine, but talk. Don't let people down. Be human. Okay, team roles. I'm going to go through this. We mentioned you guys work in developing, so you actually have an idea. Strategist is external to the team. We call it, in our environment, the strategist is the product owner that you're familiar with. Scrum Master, the solution designer is our analysts. Architect is a role that's not mandated by any of these things, but we actually have people whose job is to review code, to make sure we're building things right. They're not actually writing code. We call them architects. They are the guys who work really hard, got really good at this, and really understand how a system is built. Developers, and any developer can become an architect, and any architect can write code, but this is just sort of the breakdown that I'm giving you. Testers, and we have UX analysts, which is unique because what I've discovered over the years is that developers don't like front ends. Most of them don't. They actually find it to be the weakest part of the system. Users are the worst part of the system as far as they're concerned. And if they could write everything in Bash, they would, and that's fine. But the fact is we have to interact with users, and we want a consistent look and feel. And when you give developers, really architects, really analytical people to develop front ends, they aren't very user-friendly. So we run into battles with UX and development all the time. And like I said, I had to learn to respect testers, I have to learn to respect UX people also. On the other hand, there are developers who like working on front ends, so don't get me wrong. There are people who